and live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.
All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Red Lotus Life. So excited to be here. We have a special guest again, Ennis Barger. I don't know if anyone has not actually seen the previous episode. Go check it out. Pretty sure we made history with that last episode on being able to sit in a sovereign state and a healed state and have a conversation. It was called Navigating Narcissism, a Healing Dialogue. So you can check it out. We'll have probably a link below so that you can go check it out. And also we'll have it here in the video as well. It was a very honest and transparent conversation around Ennis and him sharing his story and his healing journey that he's actively working on right now with his path to purpose, really shining a light on narcissistic behavior, tendencies, and patterns, but really bringing awareness to others on what it's like to experience this, what it's like inside the lives of someone who may be expressing this type of personality style. So it's understanding expanding our understanding on this, and then also deepening empathy and compassion for this personality type. So, and it's just been so amazing. It has blown my mind. I'm not even, what we're going to be talking about today is really going to be just us reflecting on that conversation, because it has literally blown up so much. It's expanded my mind. I'm watching what's happening with myself, with my children, with my siblings. I mean, we were talking earlier before we got on here about abandonment wounds, and Ennis did such an amazing job on just touching on so many subjects. I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody to go back and listen to that episode, or go watch that episode, whatever platform you're watching that on. So, as always, I have my beautiful co-creator here, Sara Elizabeth Hoffman, and then Ennis Barger. So, you guys, that was crazy and cool at the same time. And I'm so happy that you're back with us, Ennis.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be back. There's so much to share. I think one of the things that you're talking about is it's similar to me. Like, if I were watching a sport casually for a number of years, and then I really started to pay attention maybe to what's going on in the field, maybe the strategies, the rules, the tendencies, all these different things. And all of a sudden the game becomes just a different experience. You're watching it not just as a casual observer, but you're actively kind of engaging in the thought processes and what's going on, and thinking about what might happen, like why they would run this certain play. Understanding life, to me, understanding all of the things that make us tick and work, it's kind of like understanding a sport at a deeper level, and then watching it. You just watch it differently at that point, and you start to see, like, these are kind of the rules, and these are kind of the way things happen. And I think the more that we can, and this is kind of an odd thing, because I think to be healthy, we have to dig deep into emotion and feel it and inspect it and go through the discomfort sometimes, the intense discomfort of that. But in the same respect, we also have to be able to back up from it and just see the playing field where it doesn't feel quite so personal. And when you can do that, you stand a fighting chance to then, when you're living in the middle of the emotion, to have a more informed, or maybe a more authentic relationship with it. Because the closer you are to it, sometimes the easier it is to be deceived by either our own thoughts, our own inclinations, and our own ego. And also, it's hard to parse out the personal feeling of what's going on in a situation. And we were talking a little bit about, with kids, it's particularly tough to watch things play out with your kids in their relationships, and either with it being with each other, with the other siblings, or their first romantic relationships, et cetera, friend groups. It's so often it's easier to see it there than it is to see it when it's up close, when you're involved necessarily in the situation. And so I hope that, even if people aren't really necessarily feeling like they're dealing with any of these things personally, maybe at least it gives them a kind of a playbook to look at life from just a little bit of a different perspective, and maybe see things a little bit with fresh eyes, as opposed to how we tend to see these situations when we're just trying to survive through life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sarah, how have you, what has happened with you since this conversation that we had? What have you been noticing?
I've been noticing a lot. And one of the things that I really, really love about having these conversations is that no matter who you are, where you are on your journey, there is something for you. There's something for you. And something that Ennis shared about his journey, and where he was reflecting upon sort of that time period in his life when his brother had gone to serve in the military, I believe. And that was the time period that you shared that you sort of felt yourself harden, and you had to grow up really fast and sort of become the man. And it just struck me so deeply, because my children also have, my son is 9, my daughter is 19, my daughter has recently left the house, and I can see the abandonment wounds already starting to show up. And so I was like, that was one of those things that I didn't see prior to that conversation. And so I became really, really intentional as far as making sure that connection was strengthened between the two of them, because they have always had a really, really deep bond. And that's important, especially given the fact that we're having these conversations because we are a survivor, or, my background and my relationships really formed a situation to where it was important for my children to be very close, and they formed a bond because of that. And I didn't want, I don't know, it just became so important to make sure that was intentionally strengthened and the connection was kept.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, I just wanted to share with the viewers a quick recap on what she's talking about. There was a point in Ennis's story where he does talk about the imprint, because
Mm-hmm.
this is what I love about Ennis and how he was sharing his story, is that he was saying how, he had lived a really good life. Like, he didn't have one of those like really traumatic trauma experiences or anything like that. But that's the importance of this, is that trauma happens and imprints happen. It's very unique to each person, and what may be something significant like a death or something that everyone goes, oh yeah, that's the trauma. There's also trauma that all of us experience that's not necessarily like earth shattering like it would be for what we think, what we're conditioned to think trauma is. So the part that you talked about that, and you said, well, what I really noticed was when I started to shift and change, a little bit, and harden and not be that soft, sensitive kid anymore, and all of that, was when you did speak about that. So yeah, it's just, I really loved how you talked. There's so much we're going to be talking about, I feel like, in the upcoming months, or however long it takes, because you shared so much in this and in just the one story. So yeah, sorry, I wanted to just bring that up really quick because I've noticed it in mine as well. My children's story or theirs to share, so I won't really say a lot about that, but I did notice that there was an abandonment wound there with my children as well when my daughter, who's the oldest, left the house. And then I also reflected on my own. I'm the oldest child, and so I reflected on that and going, oh yeah, there was some stuff that happened there in my own childhood of when I left, because there's 13 years difference between me and my youngest sibling. So yeah, these conversations are for people to just reflect on your lives, reflect on the different experiences you've had, because I feel that these conversations also, every single person is going to pick up something from these conversations that we're going to have. Even if you think you haven't experienced this, or you think you may not have these tendencies, I invite everyone to just be open to listening. Just be open to listening and understanding, because just what you said, Ennis, about taking that step back and being that observer. And when we're in it, we're in it. But when we have knowledge and we have understanding, that's when we can actually take a step back. And even when we're in it, we can come from a different place. And it's not saying any of this is okay, and all the things that we're going to be talking about are okay. Sara Elizabeth and I were actually talking about this a little bit and saying, this can be quite triggering for some people, I think, to hear these conversations. And so I just invite everyone to just come with open curiosity, loving curiosity, because the more we understand, the more we can actually begin to respond versus react when we're in situations. So from all sides.
I mean, I think, 100%. And I think, that's one of the things that I want people to understand is empathy is not tied to approval or endorsement.
Right.
And I think it's important to draw that distinction. It's really just, it's not so much empathy. It certainly has value in loving each other. And when I say loving, I mean at our core, loving each other. You can love someone and not condone their behavior, and and you can draw boundaries with people who you love. But I think our first responsibility in life is to love each other. Because if you really, depending on where you come from, whatever background you come from, I think most organized religions, that's one of the first tenets. And then, but even if you if you don't come from that philosophy, we really talk about being a one part. If our mandate is to love ourselves and love one another, and if we're all part of the whole, then that shouldn't be something that's difficult to do. But empathy isn't tacit endorsement by any stretch of the imagination. And while I can certainly see that there may be people who've lived really difficult, painful portions of their life in regards to relationships with people with these tendencies, and the first thing I would want to say is I'm sorry that you went through that. I mean, it's difficult. It's tough. Hopefully through empathy, there can be a path to healing. And it's funny that we say step back, because it's almost like we look at it from a visual perspective. Like there's the ground level, and then we always talk about it from an altitude level, like with the 100-foot view, the 10,000-foot view. The truth of the matter is it's really more of a deep dive inside. But you gain perspective from diving in, not backing away. So I think it's important to draw that distinction. We tend to call it that, backing up from the situation. But what I've truly found is it's diving deep within and inspecting truth there, not necessarily just between our ears. And but I hope that the message that comes through, even though it may be triggering, allows some amount of not only some healing, but also hopefully answering some questions like why. I think a common question I've heard people say is, why does this happen to me? Like, how did this happen to me? How did I get in this relationship? How did I allow this to happen? And so I think, one of the really critical things that we'll be able to touch on over the time we spend together is I hope to be able to help people understand what it is that causes us to tend to attract or gravitate towards the same dysfunctional personality types or behaviors. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't want anybody to feel like this is a attempt to try to make everybody feel sorry for people who've maybe been damaging in their life. But that's not at all the case.
Well, I do want to say though, there's a path to forgiveness, right? And that's
Sure.
when all of us feel, that's what everybody says they want to feel peace and they want to feel loved and they want to all of that. And honestly, it's the path to forgiveness that we're on with this. And that is how we obtain these that's how we have peace. That's how we have love. That's how we're not triggered. And that's actually what Sara Elizabeth and I do for our work as spiral practitioners, is we are emotional clearing practitioners, where we are able to neutralize, we decondition and neutralize, so that we can come from a loving place and a different perspective and a neutralized place. So that's what I'm asking our viewers to also, and they're pretty used to this too, I think, but that's why we're so appreciative of you even joining us. So yeah, I would just like to kind of just dive in, I guess, a little bit and just say how,
Sure.
I would like to hear more about Sara Elizabeth, but I'd like to give you the floor for a second, Ennis, and just say, how has your life, because I know that was the first time that you've openly spoken about your journey. So how has that, what's happened with you since our last conversation? Because I know what that's like. The first time that you go out and you share your story live and on a public platform, it's scary. Like, it is scary to be vulnerable. And when you shared that in the last discussion, that vulnerability is the hardest thing, probably, to show vulnerability. So I appreciate you for being brave and also taking that step. So what's happened since then?
Well, it was a mix. It was a mix of emotions. There was I was amazed at how drained I was after we spent the time recording, but there wasn't a whole lot of time to really, kind of set in it. It was with work. I had some travel. I had to do a trade show. So it was a flurry of activity, packing and getting out of town and spending time, 15, 18-hour days, that sort of thing. And then got back late in the evening, and then went home for a reunion and to see some of my family in my hometown that's 6 hours away. But I watched the video. I downloaded and watched the video on 2 plane rides, and I'll have to say, it was emotionally tough to go through it. It was almost more difficult to watch it the first time. But I think that was a key to me, that was an indicator to me that it was the right thing to do. That getting uncomfortable, if you're going to preach embracing discomfort, then, you got to live it. And so there was some trepidation. There's obviously a little bit of fear that pops up. It's, I've been comfortable sharing things, one-on-one or in small groups, but to bare your soul to the world, for public consumption, I've got to say there's something about it that's definitely, it's definitely difficult, but I was able to process through that in about, a day or two, and it just really felt good since then. It opened up the opportunity for me to have some conversations at a business conference that I would have never had prior to. And it wasn't because they had seen the podcast. It was just, came up in conversation, people noticing that I've had, people I've known for some numbers of years have talked about how much different that I seem to be. And it allowed me just to, be open and talk to people, about things, and some beautiful conversations came out of that. And what I have found most commonly, the feeling that's been arising in me, is just an excitement and an optimism towards where we go from here. And so I'm sitting out here today excited to talk further and hope that hope if just one or two people find something of benefit out of this. I mean, outside of this group, obviously we're all benefiting from it, but if anybody outside this group finds benefit from it, then that's more than an ample reason to do it. And so yeah, just feeling really good about things.
That's good. So I was looking at different analytics and things like that, because I always enjoy seeing who enjoys our content, right? And seeing like, who are we impacting? And a lot of it, you had spoken about this. I believe, I can't remember. We've definitely spoken about it privately, but I believe you spoke about it on the first one as well, about how there's just not space for men specifically, right? And you had said that your father grew up in a time and was parenting you in a time when there really wasn't that space. And that's actually a lot of who has been watching this is the masculine in the collective. And I love that. I think that's so amazing because it's true. And I do feel as if there's now opportunity for more people, and men especially, to become more vulnerable, and it's more accepted. And that's actually kind of what you said. You're just jumping into the fire, right? You're jumping off that cliff, and it is being vulnerable. So I know Sara Elizabeth did the same thing. I've been doing this for a few years, and then she did the same thing and just jumped right in.
Yeah, I did. And I actually did it on this platform with Lori there right by my side to hold the space. And I believe, again, too, with our first conversation in us, that was also me jumping off the cliff again, because I was jumping into, like, fully into my purpose around the work that I do in this world, and that Lori does as well. And that is that we are here. One of the things that you said, and I don't want to speak for Lori, I'll let you speak for yourself, but I'm going to speak for me here. But one of the things that you said is that, and I loved it, was that you are here. You want to help the hurt people that hurt people. And that is what I'm here to do as well. And it takes a level of compassion and a level of empathy and conscious awareness and a level of it's almost as if, like, once you have glimpsed the awareness that we are all one in a way that you can't unsee it, the knowingness that there is not any part of another person, another being, that is not also within you, you can't not have the love and compassion in order to lend a hand and to open your heart for the space of healing. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to me. I knew that when we left the retreats that we were going to have this conversation, that these conversations were going to happen. I believe I had called Lori before we even left. And I was like, yeah, I really want to have this conversation. Like, this guy's amazing. Just that you are such an example of the possibility of healing between the masculine and the feminine, the healing within the collective. And I'd really like to talk about, how do we get here? How do we get here? And I feel like it really is all about the energetics. And it no matter who you are, it's always rooted in trauma. My story is rooted in trauma. Your story is rooted in trauma, whether you're aware of it or not. And so when we show up to relationships, no matter what the dynamic is, it's almost like it's the polarities that exist. And, when they say opposites attract, they truly do. They truly do. So what I see showing up is that I show up with my specific trauma, my wounds, my conditioning, and it's going to attract the exact match for whatever needs to be healed. And we don't go into it seeing that until we know what we know, right? And so what I started to see in my situation was that it was the fire that needed to be ignited in order for me to do my own healing work. So I'd love to hear what your take on that is.
Well, I couldn't agree more on a number of different points. One is, once you see yourself as part of the whole in a way that you can't unsee it, that there's no going back, and it's like, and there's truth to that. And what I really hope and pray is that everybody has the opportunity to have a moment like that in which that truth just becomes unrefutable to you. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's critically important that people embrace the use of plant medicine in their healing journeys. I think that's one of the things that was most significant to me was having lived a life that felt disconnected from everything around me. I didn't know it at the time, but one of the most significant pieces was the feeling of connectedness with everything, not just the people around me, but the earth, the plants. I mean, there's just, you see an energetic fabric that we all coexist within. And if you want to take a dive into the science behind it, then, science is marrying spirituality at a level that I've never seen in my lifetime, which is, you look at the quantum world and it supports all the things that we're really talking about. It's all an exchange of energy and potential energy and things that are waiting to be observed and manifested with intent. And so, I think that's one of the keys. I think for our society, our world to heal is to stop being so emphasized, so paying so much attention to our differences and actually looking at the massive amount of us that are all the same. And the other piece of that, you're talking about, and this is something I think we could spend quite a bit of time on, but it's, there's definitely a law of attraction involved, and the mechanisms we can parse that out, at length. But I think you just have to first just acknowledge the truth that that we're all walking around almost with like it's almost think of it like a Lego piece, right? We're all walking around with certain patterns on us, and there's certain pieces that just naturally match to that, or you could use a magnetic attraction kind of a thing, and it's all born out of our lived experiences, and then how those two things come together. I mean, everybody's heard the terms codependency, codependent relationships. I mean, this is really the root of codependency is people's traumas just happening to kind of match together. And I think at face value, we look at it like if you had to tackle a job and one person was good at this aspect of the job and another person was good at this aspect of the job, and you have strengths and weaknesses and you come together, you're better as a result. That's what in corporate world they say, synergy. You're better than the sum of the parts. The problem is with trauma and these sorts of what I would call vulnerabilities or areas of insecurity. The problem is codependency never ends up being the sum being greater than the outcome being greater than the sum of the parts. Unfortunately, most of the time, it's causing two entities to not ever move forward. They're really either stagnant or dropping backwards. And so what seems like a good relationship, a good matching up of the parts, just ends up not being the case. And so, one of the things I think that's very important for anybody to look at is in my relationships when there's been hurt or trauma, how much of it is just what happens in life, and how much of it is something that there's something inside of you that's either attracting that, or it's making you vulnerable, or worse yet, making you crave a behavior or crave a treatment that at face value would tell anyone you would never want in your life. But oddly enough, somewhere underneath there's a craving that's drawing that towards you. And so I think the key for anybody in healthy relationships is understanding themselves. And then you have a fighting chance to have healthy relationships with other people who, hopefully on a path to try to understand themselves better. But we can only truly be responsible for, where we're at in that respect. And the best chance we've got is to really to know who we are. And because at least if there's things in you that you're still working on, you're aware of them, and you're aware of maybe what that can bring in your life if you're not very careful about holding some standards, drawing some boundaries, and making sure that you don't get sort of sucked in to some of the natural things defense mechanisms and the natural things that have come up in your system over the years when dealing with the things that have all gotten us where we stand today. That's kind of a convoluted answer to that, but I think that's something we could spend a lot of time talking about. And I think it merits a good amount of discussion, whether it be today or in a different episode.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool too, that you just brought that up, Sarah, because I feel, and as you talked on it, really, you're right. There can be a whole episode that's just on this. I fully believe that, the things that activate us or trigger us or hurt us, or, kind of like what you said, how did I find myself here? And you start to just even have awareness around the patterns and going, okay, this continues to happen. And then also if we have awareness around that there are triggers, there are activations that are happening, it 100% shines a light on the opportunity to heal. Like it's shining a light on what is in there, right? What's in there. We can go deeper in those areas. When you're talking about the codependency and the Legos and all of that, it very rarely actually ends up good for anybody, but it's even having the awareness, right? So I feel like what I want to share with people and what I've discovered in my journey is that I had to have awareness first, because I remember for a long time I was really working on healing all of this. I didn't want to bring emotional baggage into another relationship. I honestly, at that point in time, my scope of lens that I was looking through was like this. And I was thinking it was very much just about the marriage and everything that I experienced there. And what I didn't understand was everything that led up to that. And so I did bring it into the next relationship that I had, even though I was so consciously aware of, I don't want to do this. I don't want to bring in any of this stuff. And then what I did is I did find myself starting to have these relationships even after I had done so much work. And I was going, wait a second, what's happening here? So I love that you even brought that piece up about understanding self. And I think when you start to really dive into what is who am I? How did I get here? What has led up to these points? Why am I finding myself in these patterns with different people in my life? But really noticing, like having a focus on even the awareness of what is triggering you in these relationships and in these behaviors. I think that's really huge, because if you look at that and I guess not step back, but dive in, right? What you were saying, and dive in and look at that and look deeper into, why do you think you have, like, why are you reacting this way? Why is this bothering you? And then look back into your past, specifically childhood. Kind of, I mean, we go through all of this in a lot of different episodes, but it's like really, I feel I'm kind of circling back to Ennis when you asked about this, like, why does this happen to me? That's like the biggest question you get. And I feel like it really is just starting to have that awareness of even what is happening, what are the patterns, understanding yourself, going deeper into, I'll be honest, I thought I had an extremely amazing childhood. I thought, I mean, when we were like, this is our normal, right? How do you know anything other? And I did have a great childhood, but also now that I've been able to go, why did I find myself in these relationships, and in especially extreme ones? There was dysfunction that was happening. There was trauma that was happening, but it's also life stuff too. Just like what you said, Ennis, it's also life stuff. And I think because, like, I was somebody who was kind of dismissing it as, well, it's just life stuff. But if we really look into, like, these are the root causes of what really does, this is how we're finding ourselves here. This is how we continue to keep getting into these situations. And yeah, it goes deep. That's good.
Well, the stigma around emotional health, it's not just at the level of going to seek help from a professional. I think that's an easy one. That's an easy line to say. People have zero hesitation going to the doctor about almost anything. And grabbing a pill for it, right? And we have a whole economy based around it. We consume more drugs than any other population on the planet by a long shot. And it's interesting that people have very little stigma about going to the doctor and saying, "Hey, I'm depressed," or "I've got anxiety," and they just hand them a pill. That seems like it's been destigmatized more, probably because there's billions of money in advertising spent to do that, to change that needle or move that needle. But if you really think about, even at our core level, if I have pain in a part of my body, I'm going to try to seek out how to how to relieve that pain, right? How to make it better. Hopefully it's not systemic of something larger. But even when we're unhappy, we'll almost try to convince ourselves that we're happy, because almost the worst thing in the world you could do is admit that there's something wrong, between your ears or in your soul, whatever might be the case. It's like we're almost in denial at our core level about it, because you don't want to be seen as someone who's got those problems, right? And I think that's one of the barriers for people to even take a quick look at where they stand on things. But it's an asinine assumption that we're going to be good at relationships. I mean, no one expects someone to walk on into a gym and immediately be good at the technique and lifting. No one's going to expecting someone to go onto a tennis court and know how to play tennis the first time they play tennis. So this assumption that we are ready to tackle relationships at any level, especially in our adolescence and we get into our young lives, we don't even know who we are yet, let alone who other people are. And so I think there's a lot of internal pressure that we're supposed to be able to get it right, and we are getting it right, and there's no reason to try to get better at it. But it's the most complicated aspect of our lives. Relationships are the most complicated aspect of our lives, and we spend so little time talking about how to be better at it, to how to better function, how to be healthy in those relationships. And the first thing you have to be able to do, if I'm going to if I'm on a basketball team and we're losing, the first thing I'm going to look at is how can I be better to help the team. It's the same thing in life. You know, if you're having problems in relationships, the last thing we want to do is look inside. We want to point the finger, and somebody else is probably the problem, and they may certainly play a significant role in the issue. But the one thing that we can control is at least an understanding of ourselves, and at least, you know, our behavior, you know, the choices that we make and the way we behave. And it's a difficult path, but I can guarantee you have much more leverage changing yourself than you do changing anybody else in this world. And so if you want a recipe for ultimate amounts of frustration, is be deeply unhappy, don't take any accountability for it, and then try to fix that problem in everybody else. It's a horribly it's a horrible road fraught with frustration and failure. And so I think that's really, you know, one of the reasons that I'm coming back to that theme is just, you know, you've got to have a solid foundation in order to have a fighting chance to have healthy relationships at any level. And so learning about other people is important, but really only relationship to how do we navigate relationship with that other person. And it's really about how do we control the parts that we control in relationship to whatever this other person has going on in their life. That's really all. That's all we got. We've got control within this sphere, and so I think it's important that the discussion really center mostly around what can we do, both from the other side of this, from someone who's come to awareness about some things that were going on in my life and the way that it affected the people around me, also to the other person that says, you know, this has been something that's wounded me deeply over time. How do I protect myself in the most healthy way possible going forward? Because all of these things are really protections, right? It's just different varieties of methods of protection. And some of those methods of protection have zero regard for anybody else. In you know, when they're put into place or when they're exercised. And that's where I think the most damaging pieces come from, is when someone is just so damaged and so defensive that they really truthfully inside there's no limit to what they're willing to do to protect themselves. And so the more extreme cases of trauma, I think, tend to end up relating into the most extreme cases of outward damage that's done from that person. So I do think it's proportional, at least in my experience.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, I always, you know, now that I've gone into this work, I'm always asking, I wonder what they've experienced. If this is the projected behavior, you know, and what's actually happening externally, then yeah. What have they gone through and experienced? And again, not saying anything's okay, but I mean, I've been there. I won't speak for Sara Elizabeth, but I've been there, you know. I mean, I feel like all of us have been there at some point in our lives where we are all behaving in ways that everything is coming out sideways, right? All the emotions and everything. And it is quite damaging and quite destructive on a physical level, also mentally and emotionally. So I love this, you know, that's one of the things we talked about a little bit was mirror theory, and how us as spiral practitioners, this is actually part of our lifestyle. It is constantly, anything that comes up, we always look at self first. And that has expanded my empathy. I mean, it has deepened my empathy for others, especially on this path to forgiveness. forgiveness of self too. You spoke about all of that. I mean, honestly, you spoke about so much that was amazing. Even just the self-hatred and forgiveness for self and how to speak to self. I feel like all of us can take from this and learn from this, because we all really do have these tendencies and behaviors. I don't know anyone that wouldn't. I mean, all of us have it at some point.
Right.
It's just how are you navigating it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and that reminds me of something I did want to make sure that I brought up was, some of the things that I'm sharing about my personal experience. Some of the components of that are they're really agnostic to how the trauma ends up manifesting itself out. So it may be that someone with a really destructive inner voice, or a perfectionist mentality, kind of a perfectionist mindset. It can be that those are hallmarks of those personality traits. I think that certainly there's a pretty good chance that that's a big part of those personality traits. But there are plenty of people who have a really destructive inner voice that have trauma in their background, and it's coming out in a lot of it's coming out in a lot of different ways. It could be more of a victim mindset, or a martyrdom kind of a mindset, or a myriad of different behaviors and coping mechanisms. So I don't want people to think that if they have a destructive inner voice, I'm saying that you probably have narcissism. I'm not saying that at all. I think it's a component, but I think the key difference is whether there's a fictitious identity that's created, a facade that's created. I think that's one of the bigger hallmarks, and then the identification of basically everyone and everything in your life kind of being a part of this, popping up this image, right? I think those are the two really, really big pieces. Another one is going to be, if we're talking really about emotions, the only emotion that's comfortable, and I say comfortable loosely, but the most comfortable emotion for someone, at least in the way I experienced the narcissistic side of things, the only acceptable emotion is anger, because it's the one emotion that doesn't really require vulnerability to express it. And so when we talk about inspecting ourselves, that's one of the big pieces is, what's the origin of your emotion? What's the true origin emotion behind whatever's coming out? Because most often what comes out isn't really the first emotion. Looking back, there's certainly times in life where there's justified anger, but it's a small percentage of the time that we're angry, and that was one of the biggest things that I've noticed in myself, is that all of these years that this work has been going on, the most consistent thing I've noticed is just lower and lower and lower amounts of anger. And if you want to pulse on society, look at social media and look at the way people engage with each other on social media. There's a lot of anger being spewed out there, and I don't think the majority of it's really rooted in true anger. I think it's fear, it's insecurity, it's hurt, it's loss, it's
survival.
It's all these different. It's survival, and so I think particularly, I think it happens for everybody, but I think particularly for men, where you're not really expected to give a well-rounded display of emotions. Anger is the one that seems to be acceptable, from a societal standpoint. But when I really started looking at anger and why was it flashing up, that deep dive is what ended up answering a lot of those questions. And the vast majority of the time, the thing that you explode at, the thing that you let that pressure out towards, is it couldn't be further removed from what really the source of the problem is. And so when you talk about stopping, breathing into it, inspecting inside, that's where so many answers come that provide some growth. And the next step, in my opinion, the next step is, once you identify what the real true emotion is, that's where then you have to kind of dig in, and you can't just recognize, oh, it's this, and then bail and move on. There's a reason that you're choosing anger. You're choosing to feel anger, and it's because it's the least uncomfortable discomfort. And if you want a chance to not strike out in anger the next time that sensitive spot gets touched, you got to get in and you got to deal with whatever caused that raw spot to occur, to appear in your spirit, in your soul, in your body. And that's not a comfortable thing, especially when the last thing you want to feel is vulnerable in your life. The hardest thing to do is dive into the feelings of vulnerability. But that's where true courage and bravery lie, is in wading into something that you're not at all prepared to know how to deal with, and then having the faith to do it, and I think you build up courage in life by taking those deep dives into the places you don't want to go. And it's funny. I used to look at people who did these, like, talked like this, did these things, and really embraced, digging deep and processing how they feel about things. I would scoff at them, and I would discount what was going on. And and I truly thought that I was brave, just because I got up every day and waded into life, ready to deal with life through all of my dysfunctions, right? Like, that was some sort of a badge of honor, that I would just get up and just gut through it, right? And the rest of the people can sit around and worry about all these things, but while they're doing that, I'm going to be out here changing the world and hitting my goals and doing these things. And then you realize, like, that's cowardice. I was running away at every turn from the complex yet simple things that were the gateway to a better life. And the harder you try to outrun that, the faster it gains on you. And the image that comes to my mind is the Indiana Jones when he's running and that boulder's coming, right? They all catch you at some point. And the funny thing is, what you fear that finally catches up with you is the thing you got to face to really truly experience a better life. You think it's death, and it is. There's definitely a death and a resurrection that it's involved when you deal with these things.
Multiple,
yes.
Yeah.
But my goodness, how nice it is on the other side of it. But it takes faith. It takes being willing to take a step into something, not knowing what's on the other side. And sometimes, like for people like me, the thing on this side has to get so bad that whatever's on the other side appeals to you to be better. I hope there are people out there that are willing to take that uncomfortable step before they don't really feel like they have any choice necessarily. But anyway, I don't feel like I kind of went off on a tangent there. So,
I have a
No, that's good.
question. Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I wanted you to keep going because it was good. It was good what you were saying. Can I ask you a question about the flash of anger?
Mhm.
Okay, so
Sure.
when you were talking about that, that's something that I was very familiar with in my relationship, was that flash of anger. But I'm wondering, if you are unaware and you're unaware that these are the things that are happening, and you have that flash of anger, and remember in the first conversation we had, you said, oh man, like anyone who goes toe to toe needs to have heavily padded gloves, because you did speak about that flash of anger,
Mhm.
right? And how
Yeah.
the protectiveness, right? And that's to protect. So if you're not aware of these behaviors and that's what your go-to is it because you don't like that person had better not ever come at me? Like they had it's almost like, what were your words? I'm trying to remember your words. It was basically, you were saying that they'll never do it again, right? If
Mhm.
I'm going to make sure that they are never going to, mess with me again, type thing. So do you think that
Sure.
that happens because of the vulnerability? Because I understand that now, that when there are the flashes
Mhm.
of anger, that there's something that's much deeper inside. It is fear, it is loss, it is grief, it's insecurity,
Rejection.
it's all these things, but it comes out like that so that this will not happen again. So I'm curious if I'm on the
Right.
right path with that thought process.
Mhm. So there's a couple different things at play. There's, you know, I was specifically in that scenario talking about um, those deep wounds, and you know, and if anybody's of my age, you've probably experienced like back pain, for example. Like you bent over, you went to pick something up, and something happened, and all of a sudden, like you've got this thing that's this pain in your back. But one of the other things that I've noticed about that is this, how exhausting it is when your back's vulnerable, because your entire body around your back is guarded the entire time. So just a walk to the bathroom and back, you know, talk about like white knuckling a steering wheel during an ice storm. It's like that through your entire movement, because you're guarding this one really vulnerable spot. So take that to the emotional side of things, and that's one of the things I think people don't understand, is that these people with these deep emotional scars they're constantly walking around guarding them, and particularly if you poke at one of their deep wounds, that narcissistic rage that will come back is definitely of a volume that is encouraging you never to touch that spot again. And so there's that level, which can be so deeply hurtful. I mean, there's no rules on what gets said. Sometimes there's no rules on what gets done. You know, I mean, physical violence can certainly be an escalation in that area. But you know, verbally, some of the ugliest things will be said in those times. Then there's just the walking around anger that folks carry around, and if you think about it, it's just there's a resentfulness for the way that they walk around feeling, and it's certainly like thinking about that back thing. Let's say you're 2 years in to never being able to take a step without pain. There's a price to pay for that, and I'm sure there's irritability and there's short fuse and that sort of thing. But the anger is just always there, and there are times when it gets accelerated, it gets excited, and it kind of starts to blow out. And then there's just the amount that you carry around. But when you really start to inspect anger, if you're self-aware, you do begin to look back into what was it that really sparked that. Because I mean, and if you tune into your body, and this is one of those things that really learning to do now is if you tune into your body, you know exactly the moment when it starts. If you wait until it hits you here and you start to rationalize it, you're sometimes 2 and 3 steps away from the source. And so really diving into the body and when did that feeling come up? What was that feeling? And then you start becoming aware of it when it happens more often. And you'll realize that it happens way more often than you would ever consciously notice it on your own without it being brought to your attention. And as someone on the other side of it, if you're dealing with someone who's unaware, who's unself-aware, and you see these reactions happen, a lot of times you'll see it on their body before you'll hear anything come out of their mouth. And there's a reflexive, like almost a movement back. There's something that happens that they're immediately kind of guarded. And sometimes you may have to try to figure out for them what started that cascade of emotions that ended up in this thing, right? And that's tough to do. But if you're in a relationship and it's not a relationship that you feel comfortable completely distancing yourself from, you've got to have some rules of engagement to live by. And part of that, unfortunately, is you end up becoming tuned in to what's going on with that person, so you can better understand how to deal with that person, and maybe hopefully not come at that situation in the same way in the future. Because one of the things we talked about is once somebody, like, somebody who's deeply hurt, deeply insecure, is on their heels, you've got little chance to reach them with anything of value. And it may just be a good time to know to disengage and come back at a different time. Because that emotion, that chemical bath from those emotions is potent. I mean, there's a like, for me personally, there's a feeling of warmth that comes up from my shoulders, and it comes all the way over the top of my head, and I can feel it come down my face. And it is like, it's an intoxicating drug, and it disorients. And it's like the blinders come on, and it's not a fun place to be on the inside. It certainly isn't a fun place to be on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for describing all of that, because you're right. I can see that in others that I'm engaging with, but also I recognize that in myself when I'm in those spaces. So again, saying the same story, that's what we actually started our conversation with last time about this, with Sarah and I were both saying, you're sharing your story, or our stories. Like, I feel like anyone, if they have an open mind and they really pay attention to this, that they can, especially if they've experienced this with others, because we do have that triangle that starts to happen, from offender, victim, healer,
victim, savior, perpetrator.
Yes, exactly. All of that happens. And so I appreciate you saying that, because what that does is I feel like it brings awareness to those who are not aware. And that's the biggest thing, right? Is how do we I feel like that's the thing that breaks this and is, I really want to break the stigma on this. Like, that's the whole purpose. That's the whole intent of having these conversations, is being able to say that, no, there is, I don't know, what would you call this? What do you call this work, Anna? When you were,
that's good. That's a good question.
That can happen. Yeah. When there's like, nope, there's nothing that can happen. This is just who they are, but.
Right. Yeah. There's a hopelessness in that, and I think we all want to feel like we can affect change. Most of the time we're trying to affect change everywhere else besides at home, or besides internally. But,
right.
But I don't, I think there are certainly instances in which it's an uphill battle for some people to pull out of things. And and ultimately, like we talked about in the last episode, you can't want it bad enough for someone else for them to get better. They have to do it for themselves. But I really do hope that there's not anything in this world that can't be healed from. I mean, I know it may be improbable at times, but how sad would it be if there were just places that we get to as human beings that there's no coming back from? I don't know. There's a part of me that just rejects that there's no path to redemption for anybody, and that goes for whether you have the Judeo-Christian philosophy. I think that's and that's really one of the things you talked to Lori about, self-forgiveness. When I spent some time, I grew up in a Christian household, and I spent some time really feeling either atheistic or agnostic. And, but when I really started to look at all the different organized religions and spiritual belief systems, the one thing I think I appreciated the most about Christianity is, and I don't think it's lost on in the fact that this is the main tenet, is the whole religion really is based upon this idea that a perfect deity chose to embody themselves in a human form and then live a perfect life and then die in exchange, to carry the weight of sin. I think the thing that most often gets lost is the brilliance, even if that's just a made up story, right? The brilliance of the fact that whoever wrote that understood the human condition is most often going to be plagued from a lack of ability to forgive ourselves, to love ourselves. And so when the basis of the whole belief system is around a perfect deity loving you regardless of the fact that you're an imperfect human being, I think that's rooted in understanding that the gateway to salvation for us as human beings is to be able to forgive ourselves, and in turn be able to forgive other people. Because if we are all one, how can you do one without the other? And so if you take nothing out of any of the other teachings of Christianity, and I'm sure there's other religions that have similar stories, that's the one I think we have to take from it is, yes, I have things to work on, but I am not going to get any better hating myself for my past transgressions and judging myself from a point of understanding today that I couldn't fathom at that point in time. Like we have this horrible habit of judging ourselves by today's understanding, but we were ignorant of the things that we've learned since then. And and so I think that's one of the most important things I would say for anybody's overall health and well-being, physical, mentally, emotionally, and for the health of everybody around them, is just quit carrying around this laundry list of all the things you've done wrong in your life and beating yourself up about them every opportunity you get. That if people could just do that, I can't imagine how much better life would be if they did that. And then secondarily, take the time to inspect how you're feeling and why. I can promise you it's never time wasted to do that. Matter of fact, the payoff, if you really want to get back into just a regular dirty return on investment kind of a mentality of thinking, which I don't subscribe to. I don't think this is transactional, but just think about mental energy, spiritual energy as it's finite, right? We only have so much to give in a day. And if you just think about how much that frees up if you stop spending so much of your time beating yourself up for stuff that you can't go back and change, and then secondarily being upset about things and you don't even know why you're upset. Like think about how much time you've spent in your life in one of those two zones, and then and then and then look at like how could that time and energy be spent differently, and what would life look like if it were all these years? So that's the thing. That's the things that I try to be conscious of. It's like, how much time am I not being present? Uh, how much time am I living in a past I can't change, or in a future that's not guaranteed? When the one moment you really have traction, the one place you know, the one place your car touches the road is that little bitty contact patch where the tires touch the road. That's where all the traction is, and that's the present for us. But we spend most of our time concentrating in the rearview mirror, or planning a future that we don't have any real guarantee of, and we ignore the one place we have traction, which is in the moment. Mm-hmm. And if you look at most of the energy that we waste, it's wasted outside of whatever's happening right this minute. And if you're tuned into what's happening right this minute, then you feel in your body when that thing shifts, when somebody says something that triggers you. If you're living in your head and you're living in this brain space of all this flow of consciousness all the time, thinking about all these things that really aren't happening today, then trying to uncoil why you felt messed up 5 minutes later, when you're in a rage 5 minutes later, drawing your way back to that origin point is a hell of a lot harder than if you're just keyed in to how I'm feeling right now. Or if I'm really keyed into what's that other person saying? How a lot of times we're engaged in conflict with someone, and it's not even anything they said. It's something that the imaginary person in your head says 2 steps down the conversation that you're reacting to now, right? Like we're hardly ever even present in a conversation, and we wonder why we can't communicate with people. We're having imaginary conversations in the back of our head, being prepared for battle in a conversation that's still actively going on that hasn't even taken that turn. And I think in a lot of ways we steer conversations that way because we're imagining conflict. We're imagining discourse. I don't know. I mean, there's so much depth to just coexisting with other human beings. I mean, we could truly talk about it for days. And but I think the more we understand ourselves, the beautiful part about it is the more we begin to understand other people, because we're all operating on the same playing field. It's just, and so the deeper you can dive, the more you can figure yourself out, the more you begin to see those things in other people, and that builds empathy. And I don't know. I just don't think there's anything more important in the world to talk about right now than how do we interact with each other? How do we love each other? How do we help each other heal? I don't know. It seems like the existential crisis of our time,
I think that's pretty perfect, actually, to possibly even start to wrap up. I don't know if there was anything else that Sara Elizabeth, do you have anything to share with that?
The only thing that I want to add to what Ennis was just saying is that I really love what you're saying about, like, the only way that we can have compassion for others is by knowing ourselves. But I really just even want to sit with that, because it's so true. You can't have empathy for others if you can't have empathy for yourself. And so how would we expect anybody in these dynamics to be able to hold that capacity? Yeah.
And with the self-forgiveness, how can we possibly forgive others if we're not coming from that place?
Right.
It all comes back to self. So was there anything else that anybody else wanted to share before we begin to wrap up?
No, just thank you. Gratitude.
Likewise.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Ennis, for again sharing your time and energy with us. I know how draining it is. We were also drained after the last one. We're like, wow, this was actually really cool, cool and intense. But I enjoy this, and thank you for sharing you with us. Also, thank you to anyone who's listening. I hope that you are gaining value from this and you are beginning to deepen an understanding for this type of personality style and developing empathy and compassion. And even I hope that there's some awareness that's starting to happen even within, and that after you are here with us today, that you go back. We invite you to go and reflect and notice what you notice. Notice what you notice in your life as you move forward with your day, and then come back and even listen to this again, because Ennis had some amazing tips on how he experiences this in the body. It starts in the body too, to really begin to have that self-awareness. And so if you like this, we would like you to like it. If you know there's someone out there that might be able to have value from this, please share it with others. And then we are going to be back in this space talking more about this. So please subscribe too. You'll get notifications of when Ennis is with us again. And we're just so incredibly grateful for you. Also, Ennis, did you still want to share your email on this one? I didn't ask you before we started.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's just, it's enos.barger, enos.barger@gmail.com. And I'll hopefully will catch anybody that sends a message. And if I don't, for some reason, catch it the first time, please send another. I'm not used to looking in my email for a lot of those kinds of things from new people, but I'll be checking my spam folder and junk mail folders as well, just to be careful that nothing gets dropped in there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And then, as always, please comment. Also, comment if you want to actually just comment on this podcast or wherever you're watching the video. We would appreciate that too, because we will respond to that. So, thank you for being with us today, and we will be back.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
And live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.